Ready for the interview, in a few, get a cue. Live on the laptop, watch what I'm gonna do. Welcome to the show, let them know we got a point of view. Hey, yo, let's have a combo. Say what you feel, be real, that's the motto. Real talk pronto, Dr. D, PhD, hit an intro. Hold up, wait, gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local. Gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local.
All right, Rebekka, I am so excited to speak with you, and I've watched your TED Talk several times now, and it's fantastic, very eye-opening. So thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you for having me.
So how does an economist get into the game of love?
Yeah, in a way, it has to do with my day job. So I'm a PhD in economics, who works in international development, and I focus on people and economics, so on human development. Already in my work, I study what makes families and relationships stick, what makes them stronger, and I've also, in my life previously, when I was younger, not been too successful at dating. So I really wanted to use my scientific toolkit to get behind that and really understand it better. And I documented that in a TED talk. So that really helped dig up, the economist toolkit for success in dating. And in a way, I specialize on the intersection between love and economics through my day job. And I've lectured on that in a few universities and advised clients on that.
How is that information received? Because I think on the general public, we see economics in a very different light. We don't always associate this with love and connection and relationships.
So you'd be surprised what economists have researched, right? They really don't stop at anything. So for anybody who researches the subject, it wasn't that big a surprise. But for the public, they probably thought, since when? Since when is there any data that can help me along here? And why would it be relevant? But if you start digging and pulling out a few nuggets, it amuses people and also, it opens some eyes.
It definitely amused me when I watched your TED Talk. And I think kind of your whole thing was like, well, you can't guarantee the results, but you could put the odds in your favor. Let's talk a little bit about how you can put the odds in your favor and what you've discovered through your research in this.
Absolutely. That's important, right? We need to sort of step back from wanting to control the result. All this research doesn't give you a guarantee that you get exactly what you set out for, but you definitely, you can change the odds in your favor. And what you can do is, first of all, really figure out what you want, right? What are your preferences? What is the type of person you want to relate to, you want to spend time with? Sit down with yourself and make a list even. What are your non-negotiables? And then think about where do people like that actually usually gather? This is important because what the research shows is if you don't do that, you're driven by opportunity. You're really driven by who you meet by chance. And people adjust their preferences to whom they meet by chance. And then you've adjusted to your environment rather than really choosing what you want. And so what some people that work with speed dating data found out that only 1% in the end, 1% of your choices are explained by preferences. The rest is explained by opportunities. So, you say you want a person that has a certain interest or a certain education level, or the person smokes or doesn't smoke. You cave in on all of that depending on circumstance. So the lesson from then would be, choose where you find the person that you want and then choose your environment and go there. Another important factor to sort of influence your odds is the gender ratio. So assuming, we are 90% of the population is heterosexual, so the different genders mix. As a woman, you want to look for an environment where men outnumber women, and as a man, the other way around. And that's the gender ratio, right? And now in the US, you have quite some variation on this gender ratio between urban and rural areas and between West Coast and East Coast. So on the West Coast, for example, in the Bay Area alone, you have like 114 men, 400 women, right? Of marriageable age. It's quite a difference. So there are a lot of men who are looking for a partner and not finding one on the West Coast. And oddly enough, on the East Coast, in the big metropolis in New York and Washington, D.C., you have the opposite. You have women outnumbering men. And it's not easy to negotiate for what you want in a dating market where, you're in the majority and you might be competing for attention. So you want to go where you're in the minority. And that varies by geography, but it also varies by workplace, right? Say the army or engineering has more men than women on average. And, primary school teaching and early childhood development and yoga and psychology has more women on average. So you can really choose your environment and with that influence your bargaining power.
It's so interesting. I remember, I think, the part about a German engineering firm in the TED Talk, and that was funny about. So if you want to, join a German engineering firm to put the odds in your favor. I can't remember depending on the gender you were saying, but it's very interesting information. How do you mention about your preferences? Why have we struggled to actually sit down and write those things down about ourselves that we want versus just the convenience or the opportunity aspect of it?
There is a very strong, I guess, romantic narrative that we all absorb through fairy tales and other stories, that there's only one person in the universe and you'll converge to finding that person. Now, in reality, that's not true, right? In reality, a good relationship, a good marriage could maybe happen with 5 good people in your life, not with everyone, but maybe with 5 good people. And then you have an element of choice. You have a task of finding those 5 and making a choice and upping your odds with at least one of them. But waiting passively will not get you there. Waiting passively is the recipe of, letting opportunities determine what you do. But it's this dominant romantic narrative it's still rehashed in movies sometimes that, it's all serendipitous. All you need to is, expect it and it's going to happen. And it's not quite realistic. But the other thing is, I think that's one reason. The other reason is that, it's a generational thing. And I hope Gen Z doesn't have that problem anymore. But maybe our generation, older generations, weren't encouraged so much to express what they like and what their preferences are and really be outspoken about it. And it's something you have to then relearn as an adult and say, wait, I do have a preference around this. I do like this. I don't like that. And it's, it's almost a human right, but some of us have to relearn that to get in touch with our preferences and express them.
What about for people in our audience who are not looking for the opposite gender or looking for same gender relationships? What does the statistics bear out on that in terms of creating more of favor, the odds?
So this is, the literature is only emerging on that, right? Sadly, there are not that many papers out there. But what comes up is that, there's, it's in a way, it's a little bit the opposite around with the gender ratio. So normally where you find, then your own gender in the majority, you'll have a better chance of also finding gay people in your own gender, just by mere odds. And then, of course, their venues, their interests. Sometimes it's clearly a community that's very active. It may be active in the arts and the environment and, organized clearly by a community open to same-sex relationships. And you can seek those venues out and sort of express your values and get, going on whatever social cause you have, where also the gay community is involved and is organizing and be there. And one interesting statistic. So one paper I did this, a Canadian professor who works a little bit with more recent data on same-sex relationships. And in the US, actually, most same-sex households are married. You have quite a high incidence of gay marriage. And the statistics are a bit different for same-sex female relationships to same-sex male relationships. There are a lot of committed same-sex relationships for women that move in quickly together, but they're on average a little less stable than the same-sex male relationships, where apparently there's the courtship is longer, the thinking is longer before you commit, and those relationships are usually fairly stable.
So fascinating. It's interesting stuff. This kind of reminds me of, I remember when I was growing up and here in the US about like if you wanted to be in a certain profession, you would move to a certain place because the odds were higher. For instance, if someone wanted to be an actor or in theater, they needed to be in New York City or in LA to increase the odds that they would actually get into that business and have security for that. Is this a similar, sounds like a similar concept, but in terms of like gender and where people, the population of people, where they're at to give yourself just a better chance. Almost seems like college is a great example. College is a weird place because the population is huge in a lot of colleges, so the opportunity is big. And then once you leave college, it feels like the opportunity starts shrinking depending on where you are or that. So kind of like looking at it that way is part of it as well.
Absolutely. And you're touching your finger in all the right levels, right? So it's like there's sort of the very aggregate level, just number of people or number of potential partners, like, college or meeting lots of people, having lots of interaction places with sports or NGOs or any leisure activities or organized religion or what have
Right.
you, organized politics, whatever works for you, having a lot of encounter points, this already ups your odds. But then if you drill a bit finer, and your art example in a way is doing that, you can think about, okay, where do the people gather that hold my same values, that have the same, I don't know, open-mindedness, so they have the same curiosity or the same interest in wellness, whatever it is, then you can think about where do they gather? Are they more frequent? Are there maybe, colleges where there are more of these colleges that are, uh, more active in some sports or
Mm.
more active in some, social areas, social justice, depending on what you're looking for, you can drill a bit more finely. And there's an interest group for almost everything. And yeah, it's exactly all of this in a way influences your odds.
So in some ways, if you were going to college and you were saying, I would like to find, a partner in college, some of that process of the college you go to may be dependent upon the values of that college or the types of groups that are there as part of the decision making process, not just the academic side of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very good point. And it's the gender ratio again, because some faculties, like engineering, physics, you have more men, and some, pedagogy, psychology, you have more women. So the gender ratio does play a role. The academics, of course, play a role. That's a value in itself in a way, to what extent does academic excellence matter to me? If it really matters a lot, I want to be in a place where it matters to the others. But absolutely other courses as well. Is this a university very active on the environment? Is it very active on social justice? Is it very active in an area that's, in athletics, in an area that really, matters to me, and I want a partner that likes the same things, or in the arts, or, it's absolutely, that's a very valid factor. Because, a lot of people would probably be shocked at this consideration. They would think, okay, you should only select your college based on the academic excellence. But if you think very long term, what makes you happiest is not wealth and prestige. It's really the quality of your relationships. And interestingly, this has been studied with, the original cohort of Harvard graduates, a
Yes.
really super long-term study, which you may know, right? The Grun happiness study on the Harvard graduates and their descendants. So like originally, I think some 720 men, because there were men at the time, but now they're descendants and wives and partners and like sort of 1,300 people. And it's very, very clear that, the quality of your relationships attracts everything else. Yeah, a very good reason to choose where you go.
I have read the book, The Good Life, that talks about that study. And I've done several lectures on that study, the ongoing study. So I'm very
Oh,
familiar
great.
with it. And it
Oh,
has
wonderful.
driven a good part of my kind of value system, driven the work that I do, mentorship and things of that nature. And it's funny, as you talk about like wealth, prestige, all that. Why do we still think that's more important than clearly a super long longitudinal study that is incredible? What's the disconnect? Why we haven't put that together just yet?
Before our podcast, I did a few LinkedIn polls, right? Because I wanted to get at this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ran for different age groups, I ran a poll on, what do you most worry about? Your relationships, quality of relationships, economic, financial stability, climate change. And I also asked what makes you happiest. So people answer differently. I gave them the same categories to choose each time. So from this, people like 70% worry about economic and financial stability, and only 15% about, finding the right partner or the quality of their relationships. So 70% really worry. And if you ask for happiness, already 55% say, well, relationships make me happiest. And wealth and income, not quite so much. So I think it's this dichotomy that we're so loss averse. We're so afraid of failing economically that we invest a lot there and manage our risks around that a lot. And there's some trade-off, right? And then we lose some attention for the importance of relationships. This is what I conclude from the survey. And the other thing is, in a way, it's to an extent, it's a false trade-off because, who you would date, mate, and marry really influences how successful you will be, and the other way around. It can be a very fruitful relationship if you have a partner that really supports you in your dreams and in your career, in your hassles. That's worth so much. But yeah, I think it's a worry that gets the better of our attention, unfortunately.
And this, do you feel also like you mentioned generational before? Do you feel like this is somewhat generational where people of the past have I think about like, if you think about in America, especially from the Depression era, the 1920s on, there's a very scarcity based mentality, and maybe rightfully so, because people lost everything. And then now you move up in time and people are saving money and everything's about saving money, having stability, this American dream idea. And it's all about working a lot and having that nest egg and retirement that we've maybe pushed people into this idea that you're working to retire, you're going to school to have a great job. Those relationships, don't worry about that type of thing. I feel like that a shift is happening in there, but there's still a little bit of a transition period I sense with this. We're fighting. We're fighting this concept of, I know this is better for me, but I still need to make a lot of money. Like we're fighting that. That's what it feels like.
You're totally right. Like on the one hand, Gen Z and already the millennials got a few things right. They prioritized social causes. They prioritize purpose over wealth to an extent when it comes to choosing where to work and how to work. And you see that also there's great data from online dating. So the younger generations are very, very present online at the different apps. And they really value inner values, authenticity, honesty. A very value oriented generation, and to that extent, a very relationship oriented generation. But that's overlaying, and you described it really well. The fight is because it's overlaying another trend, and that's the trend towards more inequality. Unfortunately, most Western nations have become more unequal since the 1970s. And it's a process that's hard to stop. So sometimes the gap is so wide that no American dream can bridge it. No social mobility can get you from the very bottom to the very top in one generation. It's incredibly hard. And this has become much, much harder. And with that, of course, the worry has become stronger. You need two incomes. One income doesn't stretch as far. People have felt it, and they do feel it in comparison to their parents and grandparents as well. So these two trends are there, and young people feel the inequality trend as well, and the lower social mobility in our generation. So that risks in a way diluting their strong value and relationship orientation.
Right. And I mean, if you think about it, it's very difficult for a younger person in these generations to buy a home, to afford moving
Yes.
into homes if where you're living in apartments or with your parents for a much longer period than in the past. And the opportunity to actually move into, say, the housing market is such a high bar now that that has to influence romantic relationships as a trickle down of like, well, I mean, I don't want to have somebody over my apartment when I'm sharing with two friends all the time or with my parents. Is almost delays this part of life that like that I never had that. Like I just moved out once I was in college and I just moved up after that. I do it. It was affordable for me to keep moving up. And this generation, I think, is struggling tremendously with that mobility.
No, absolutely. And it's true that home ownership um, it is a big part of this inequality in wealth, as it's also not very sensitive to inflation, while other savings are sensitive to inflation. So that can open the gap even wider. When it comes to housing, there's a fellow economist whom I like to read a lot, Daryl Fairweather. She's the chief economist of Redfin, and she has a lot of very interesting advice for policy as well to keep this housing gap to open further. And one of her advice is to tax land that's not being used. So land value tax. And I think that's very good advice. So yeah, definitely there's something to be done about the inequality and wealth gaps opening further.
So you mentioned about dating apps, and I think this is a good segue into that. What do the statistics bear out in regards to, or what do you know related to preference in dating apps? Do they do a good job of promoting preference that people actually, that a good matching system for preferences?
That's an excellent question. It's the apps are becoming ever more sophisticated in that, and they're using artificial intelligence. So Match.com and apps like Keeper AI are developing very sophisticated models to create good matches. Um, some apps work towards a short-term market, and then the question is, what is the match for you? Do you want it in the short term? Do you want short-term dating, or do you want a stable relationship? Do you want a lifelong relationship? So several apps like say Tinder and even Bumble don't serve you that well for a very long-term relationship. Um, and part of that is that they give the illusion that you have a lot of choice. And in reality, you don't have that choice. But they don't have so much of an incentive to let their customers know, that you don't really have that much choice, right? So they maximize sort of short-term interaction more than long-term relationships. And the younger generations now, you have like 80-90% are online, are connected to these things. So it is a big, market, as an economist would say. And it's definitely, a place where you can find somebody who matches your preferences very well. But there are other apps like Match.com who's been working on this for a long time. And I would imagine that currently their AI sponsored algorithm works very well to get you, something close to your preferences. And there's an app that is particularly for the marriage minded. Their goal is, to create long-term relationships in relatively short time to match you with somebody who with very good odds for long-term relationships. And they studied the literature, they studied the research on this and fed their artificial intelligence algorithm. And, they're relatively new. They're still sort of a startup, but I think that's a space to watch. They could potentially be doing relatively well.
I mean, I have experience with Match.com. Met my wife on Match.com back in
Really?
2000, 2003. This was
Great.
like a long time ago.
Yeah. So they're
So we're
ready.
talking
Yeah.
20 years ago when it wasn't in heavy use the way it is now. And certainly I'm not sure about any AI or any type of algorithms, but I did like the preference aspect of it because I didn't want to waste my time. That was my whole thing. I was tired of wasting my time, like not knowing, like if this person was in this phase of their life or not, what they were looking for. And as a younger person, when I was like 23, 24, I knew what I wanted. I wanted a long-term relationship, which was very difficult to find at when you're that age, like especially in the early 2000s. And I just was tired of wasting my time for that. And it worked out incredibly well. We're going on our 20-year wedding anniversary this summer. It's been wonderful.
Wow. Yes.
Because we got past all of the, how do I say it? The stuff that didn't was like pointless. It was like, okay, this is what I want. This is what you want. This lines up. And it was synergy very quickly because of that. And I wonder, like, do the current versions of these apps you said like this thing that got me was the choice, like the illusion of choice. Can you talk more about that? Like, I was curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah. First, let me quickly come back to a super essential point that you made, time. One illusion that we all have to an extent is that we live forever. But it's not true. Our days are numbered, right? When people come to me for advice, the first thing I tell them is number your days. Your days are numbered, right? You are working with an ultimatum. And it's very, very important in our mindset. We have all of us sort of a series of deadlines in our life, and some of them are physical. They're imposed on us, a reproductive window. Until when can we very productively do a certain job? In some, businesses like acting or modeling, you clearly have a productive life cycle. And a lot of people don't work with those windows, and they forget about them and drift through them. So the first thing you got to have clear is your days are numbered. You got to number them. And basically all people who got that right in their head married relatively soon and married well, I've observed among my clients. So I'm very grateful for your case study. And so if you have that attitude and you find a partner with that attitude, you're on a whole different level of communication, on a whole different level of authenticity, like you described, right? This is what I want. This is what you want. This is less about, let's drift here. Let's go about chemistry. How do we feel? Now, this is about very concrete things. What works for me, what doesn't work for me. And another thing I advise with this time management is that in the very beginning, when you just go for coffees, it's very superficial. Date various people at the same time and have very clear in your head what are like the 5 non-negotiables. And people who clearly don't meet one of them by the second date, you can't see again. And it's just for time management. It's not to offend anyone, but, to respect both of your time. And then you do come much more quickly to a decision. And now your question was on the choice illusion. There's this time illusion, which is just as important. And there's the choice illusion where, what we find in the long run, what works well is that relatively like-minded people or relatively similar people get along very well. So, and that's true for straight and gay couples. So, if you're birds of a feather flock together, meaning you like the same things, you mentioned the big 5, the ocean, right? Your
Right.
openness to things, conscientiousness, these sort of key personality characteristics. If you need to be similar for it to work out. And that's true for attractiveness. That's true for height, right? For superficial criteria where, we should ask second questions about because they're obviously not that relevant, but it does matter. So it's important to know where you stand, who you are, and who will match you well, and not think, it will work well with somebody who has very different characteristics, who doesn't really have my sense of humor, or it will work really well with this person who doesn't like sports, although I like sports, but they just look so nice. And, and really drilling down to what works for you and reducing this vast choice is very important.
You mentioned something, I think this was in your TED talk, and I found this to be so fascinating. I talked to my wife about it immediately afterwards. I think you mentioned, please correct me if I'm wrong, that in a very solid relationship over a long period of time, that the research bears out that you become more alike each other as you get older together. There's like a synergy that starts to come together. And I was like, oh, I'm experiencing that big time in my relationship. I feel like I've become closer to my wife's like environmentalism, her sensitivity, sustainability, all that. and that actually has brought us much closer throughout the years for things like that. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
No, absolutely. And that's what the evidence says. I'm not sure I mentioned it in the TED, but absolutely there is strong empirical evidence on exactly this happening. So there is, on most categories, values, humor, looks and background, people, match early on. But there's one category where opposites tend to attract each other, and that is spending habits. People who are very generous, and people who are big savers attract each other and marry. But what you do? So there's even somebody else, Scott Rickey, wrote a whole book about that sort of spendthrifts and tightwads. Yeah. So that's, and I still need to read it, but like I just read the excerpt and I thought that's really interesting. So what you find is this can of course then cause a bit of conflict at the beginning, but you do find a convergence in these, traits where people are still different. And the spending habits is one that's very well researched. But there are others where, the causes, where, how much emphasis you put on health and healthy eating or on sports, people tend to converge over time. Even, the taste in movies or literature, there's some convergence, right? Because you have to. I mean, you want to spend your leisure together, right? So you have to somehow meet in the middle. And definitely there is some convergence.
I just found that to be so fascinating. I think things become very real to you when you're experiencing that yourself. You're like, oh yeah, I identify with that. I see that. And then it's also interesting just observationally when you see two people together and you like, I don't know, have you ever seen a couple people together and you're like, this just feels wrong? Like, it's just like, I don't see them. Like, you get a sense like these, I don't know how they're like with each other, like, and then, oh, man, sometimes you're like, maybe that works. But I've talked to my wife about it. Sometimes you see it and you just realize, like, I don't think they're going to be together in the future. Like, something's off. And maybe one of these qualities are off between I don't know. It's just a feeling I get, but it often turns out right a lot, actually. And sometimes I don't think the people themselves see that in themselves. Uh, I don't know. I may be way off on that, but it's just like just a feeling. Certainly no statistics behind it, but certainly there's people you think, wow, how do these people get together? And they're great together. And then some people you're like, yeah, that's not going anywhere. You just kind of know it, type, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like I've seen most of the cases, I must say, in college, when you're still finding your way and you're finding out what you want, there's some experimentation, and yes,
Yeah.
then people stay together. But also, I think in a way, you're touching upon a deeper issue here. That's mental health and relationships, right? There's if you're not completely at peace with yourself and you haven't really found yourself yet, then there's something that makes you unhappy about yourself, something that makes you unhappy in your life. You unconsciously look for healing from the other person. And that's not good, right? If you're not well yet yourself, you look for the wrong things. You might be, a person with a tough childhood that are consciously looking for a partner that keeps you on edge, that keeps you walking on eggshells, because that's what you're used to. But it's not right, and it won't keep you right in the long run. You need to step back, be alone, and get well in yourself first. So there's a strong evidence in a couple of papers also coming out relatively recently, saying that, your mental health and the quality of your relationship afterwards are really correlated. So, and there's a link in both relationships of both directions, of course. So you're in a happy relationship, you're happier, you're mentally better. That's a very strong relationship. But there's also a causal relationship between you being mentally well and choosing the right person for yourself. And I've seen a few cases where, people were driven by old wounds that weren't healed and therefore picked people who really weren't good for them or really didn't match well and they weren't good for each other. So that's sometimes the case.
That's it's very interesting. I wonder where all this is headed, like with dating apps and the statistics behind it, like you mentioned. And in your ideal situation, what would be the best way for someone to put the odds in their favor? If you could like make like really like really put something together. And you're like, this is the crux of this. This is how I'm going to ensure the best possible chance for this.
So these, the two steps we mentioned are the first ones to do, right? Realize, your life will be limited. Hopefully it'll be very long and very healthy, but it will be limited and your days are numbered. And you have a few internal deadlines, which are your own, and you need to manage with, right? And then you need to realize, wait, there is not, in this life, you won't be drifting towards one person. There will be a few people you do very well with, and you need to find them and you need to take decisions. And then, once this is clear, sit down with yourself and decide what are your 5 non-negotiables. And then go out there, right? By all means, be on all the apps, right? They need to be transparent. They need to be in competition with each other. Then they end up serving people well. And you need to know what they do for people. And the ones you feel comfortable with, by all means, put yourself out on those apps. And likewise, once you know what your 5 non-negotiables are, and you start dating in parallel, make sure you don't see a person that doesn't meet them more than twice, just to respect their time and respect theirs. I think that's really, these are the basics for the odds. And you've done a lot if you do that. And then the third thing will be, choose your environment. If you know what's close to your heart, what your values are, what your purpose is in this life, what you want to express in this life, choose environments where people go who have those same values. And make sure, to meet often and interact frequently. With that, you've covered your bases really, really well. And then there's a paper that says, you really only need to get to know 12 people. You need to get to know 12 people. And if between the first 12 and the next one, or the best one of those 12, if you make a choice, you'll be happy with. You don't need to get going 20, 30, no. 12 people on average, is statistically fine to find the best person.
Wow, that's really interesting. I never heard that before. 12 people. Interesting. Wow, that's incredible. It's incredible information. I mean, I think this is it's interesting. Most of my friends are single. Like, I'm gonna say almost all of them are single, and which I find very strange. Because back in the day, I never had friends that were single. But I wonder if there's any statistics on an increasing level of people not wanting to be in long-term relationships or putting off being in something that is more long-term, and how that influences the way they pick people and things of that nature.
What you do find is that people marry later and later, right? And then sometimes people get confused by the statistics because you take, say, the population 20 to 55 and the marriage rate is down. But the overall likelihood to get married isn't down that much because the 55 plus, several people marry for the first time after that. So your overall likelihood to ever get married in America is still like 95%, right? But several of these are now first-time marriages after 50. And therefore, any aggregate statistic looks a bit scary, but you need to know, and in some countries like Britain, your odds to get married at all have never been higher, right? But still people marry later and later. And the different factors that lead us to postpone marriage. One is our education spans got longer, people add, degrees, and then they add postgrad degrees. And different, then you may just be out of college, but a recession may hit. You may not feel economically ready. And then again, the social equality, the economic equality we were talking about, the marriage rate for people with a college degree and the relatively wealthier is much, much higher than the marriage rate for the relatively less wealthy. So the more people you have in that category, the less comfortable they will feel to commit, because this, again, we get back to our original theme that the economic worries sometimes are so strong, they cloud out what really matters. And that also leads to people, being less ready to commit or feeling less secure about it, just having a bigger worry on their mind.
So funny. the economics of living and the importance of relationships are colliding right now tremendously and maybe globally at this point, and making us have very interesting decisions about who we get with, when we get with those folks, and really heavily influencing our choices. Because if the choice is primarily based off of money, what I'm hearing is that it may be pretty detrimental to the quality of your relationship. But if the choice is based off of your preferences and understanding that relationships are the main thing, and that what creates a happy life, you're more than likely going to have better odds at having a better relationship with someone.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And then there's this broader environment of economic security or instability we immediately can't do so much about. But it's also something to think about, right? Do we want our society to be a bit more secure? Do we want it to be more stable? Do we want to become active in that space, right? And make sure that, this inequality doesn't rise further, and we, get behind some good causes of, taxing the right things and, not so much others. And so that's also a cause to get behind. Working on the system, even as an individual, it's hard. But if you team up, it's not quite that hard. But you're absolutely right. At the individual level, prioritizing relationships makes for lifelong happiness
And
rather than.
yeah. And would you say, I know this is kind of love and economics, but would you say these same lessons would apply to friendship and other types of relationships, or is that very different in your mind?
Some things are very similar. So, like how friendships form, this opportunity and preference is very similar. So, you end up befriending the people that were in your college dorm, right? The people you run into, the people whose way you cross just by being there. So, again, your environment drives a lot of friendships. We tend to be a bit more tolerant of difference in our friendships. So you can have opposing views on politics, opposing views on religion,
Right.
on several things. You can be very different on the five ocean, right, in your friendships. And it may be enriching because you consume your friendship at a lower dose, basically, right? You live in
I
and
love that.
out. And so we're less tolerant of these differences in marriage or in long-term committed relationships.
We consume this at a lower dose. I've never heard that. That's amazing. That's a great way of putting that, Rebekka.
It's also a recipe. If you find a person difficult, you don't necessarily need to cut them out. You just need to lower the dose.
You actually operationalized this for me. I've had kind of I would say more informal way of doing that, but kind of formal. Like I have like tier my relation, like I tier my friendships. I'm sorry, anybody listen to this, you're my friend. I'm sorry, this is how I do it. But I will definitely have people where my preference is to spend more time with them. So they may be in this higher tier. And then I may have other people. It doesn't mean that I don't like them. I just maybe we don't have as much the dosage. I don't want the dosage to be as high. So I'll spend time with them less. And then I may have friends that I'm acquainted with. We're friends, but we're kind of on like the lowest dosage, but not because I don't like them. It's just that maybe we just don't have a huge amount in common socially for that. And that's how I kind of decide who I spend more time for that. And usually it's the people, my preference is always to spend time with people that are a little risky in their behavior. They like to hang out a lot. They're very social people. They're very funny. And if a person is not those things, I tend to spend less time with them for that. So I've like got my preference down big time within friendship, but the dosage part, that's an interesting way of looking at that.
That's great. It sounds like you've got it all sorted out. That's awesome. Yeah, and then I've also found that when spend time on different places or on different continents and in some neighborhoods, some neighbors who are there permanently don't like a specific neighbor so much, but I get very well along with them. But one reason is that I dip in and out. I'm just not there that frequently, and they don't have that luxury. So I see why they might take different choices. And yeah, I'm similar. I have some friends who there's some aspects we have a lot in common and we enrich each other a lot. In some aspects, not so much. So yeah, it's just giving each other that space makes sense.
It does. Wow, this has been very informative. And I want to say thank you so much, Rebekka, for giving me your time. It is a currency that I value the most. And thank you for the currency of your time and your tremendous insight, education, and the economist mind to love. I appreciate that so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. D. This has been wonderful.
So tell the audience, because we're going to be sharing this all over the place, and I think it's going to be very valuable information. How can people learn more about you and your work in this area?
So the best thing currently is really to follow me on LinkedIn. I'm relatively easy to find, with my name. And every new insight I find that is of relevance for more people, I publish on LinkedIn. And I have a newsletter coming out soon where I will condense some of these lessons that we've discussed today in a series. So hopefully that will be very enriching for people. And always, I connect with lots of people on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me questions, and I do my best to answer them as well.
Thank you so much, Rebekka, and we will be in touch. I appreciate you.
Thank you.